We need to be strong in protecting against bad influences around our families. We need to be very strong in making sure that the good influences flourish around our families, and that we kind of continually evaluate that. Like it never is static, right? It's always, how do we do it better next time? What are the best things that we can be doing right now? And then I think the last part of that is just to make sure to rest, because sometimes just resting with your family is the best thing that you can do.
Welcome to the Fathering Strong podcast, where we connect, engage, and empower fathers to be the best dads they can be for their families and communities. And now, your hosts are Bruce Stapleton and Pastor Eli Williams.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fathering Strong podcast. I am Eli Williams, and we are delighted that you have joined us today. And we're also pretty doggone pleased to have as our guest today, Bernie Willis. Bernie is a very interesting individual. I'm sure you will enjoy our conversation with him. Bernie, we are so glad to have you today. Welcome.
I appreciate it, Eli. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm glad to be here.
The Fathering Strong podcast generally starts off with an introduction of our guests to our audience. And the way we do that is we ask you about your fatherhood story. We'll get into some other things and other aspects of your life, but to give us some insight into your fatherhood story, Bernie, tell us what it was like growing up little Bernie.
It's funny that you said it that way, because that is exactly what everyone called me, because there was Big Bernie. And so I'm Bernard Willis II, and Bernard Willis Sr. Was a railroad guy and was gone a lot. And, the short story is I come from a broken home, but from a family, an extended family that was actually pretty close. And so my, I guess the younger part of my childhood always seemed like it was a pretty happy thing until I was about 9 or 10 years old, when things really kind of fell apart between my mom and dad. And that was, I would say, very formative, in that I learned early on what some of the good things were, and I also learned early on what some of the bad things were. And then I got to watch over the next 3 or 4 years a relatively pretty contentious divorce situation with separation and then eventual divorce, and my two younger brothers both kind of going through that in different phases of their life than I was in. So very formative on all of us, what that looked like. But it turned into my own personal feeling by the time I was probably in my late teens, that I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted my life to look like differently. And in one way, you would always think that coming from a home that didn't make it, right, and I always thought of it that way. We just didn't make it over the trials and tribulations and things, and that became a definite goal for me, to ensure that I did everything possible to make sure that my kids didn't live in that same environment. And it was very formative, I think, for both myself, and I think my wife would say the same thing. We saw things in our lives when we were young that we didn't want for our kids, and so we decided that our life was going to be different. And it's where we are.
I hear that a lot. Men who decided, when they were, about to have their own families, that they're going to do the opposite of what their dad did. They didn't have a good role model as a father, and said, I'm going to change things for my kids because I know exactly what I don't want my kids to experience. So I'm going to,
Yes, sir.
yeah, my father had that story as well. So, and it turned out pretty well for you, Bernie. You've been successful in your life. Thank you so much for your military service. Let's talk about that some. How did you become a military man? And then tell us what it was like raising your kids as a serviceman.
I think I knew from a very young age. I remember my dad and my uncles taking me with them when they all went to learn to jump out of airplanes and went parachuting the first time. And of course, they left there with at least one broken ankle. But I still recall, even as a really young child, I think I was only 7 years old or something when they did that. But I remember looking out the window of the airplane, watching them jump out, going, "I'm not sure that I want to jump out, but I want to fly these things." And so it was a passion of mine that turned into some decisions right at the end of high school to pursue the Air Force Academy, and went off and did that, knowing that that was my best possibility of going flying things that no one would probably ever get to fly. Getting out of there, eventually getting to fly the F-16 for 15 years, and those are, again, it was a dream job. It was one of those things that I could never pay back. So I've always felt like I needed to be in some kind of service to at least attempt to give back. The journey for my kids, of course, is watching Dad gone a lot, especially in the in the early days of temporary duty here and there, and then deployments overseas, and those things are certainly formative to any child as they're watching that. I have a very strong wife who has never had to worry about whether our home was taken care of, and we were always in good units that acted very much like families and took care of each other. So those things were all good, but you still know that it affects your kids, knowing not only do you have a job that's dangerous every day and potentially deadly any given time, but that the call can come at any time and you're gone within 24 to 72 hours anywhere that the government needs for you to go. So it's one of those places where you definitely want to. I personally wanted to make sure that we had a strong foundation and that our kids knew that they didn't have to worry about those things as much as some might. And so we wanted our kids certainly to be raised in church and to understand that there was more than just the world taking care of these situations, and regardless of the situation, that we'd be covered and God would have us in His hand. So I think those things worked out pretty well. That experience for my our oldest, our daughter, was she was like, I'm would never go into military, and she was kind of our artsy kid. So she's a singer, vocal artist, and also an educator, and now a education technology person. So she's kind of gone through several things, still stays in music, and loved to teach kids, but she enjoys even more now helping teachers that are keeping the classrooms together and planning and all those things. My middle son's like a carbon copy of me, and he wanted to do exactly what Dad wanted to do. I always told people by the time he was 10 years old, I'm sure that he could have flown the F-16 because I had a pretty good simulation on the computer at home that he flew, all the time, and just loved everything about it. Wanted to do exactly what Dad did. Wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. Got an offer and appointment to West Point, so he went to the United States Military Academy with the plan to cross commission to the Air Force and do exactly what Dad did. And then COVID hit, and he had to divert that and stayed in the Army. He's now an Apache helicopter pilot and a captain and a new company commander, about to take his unit back to Poland for his second deployment. Last kid decided he'd outdo his older brother and got appointments to both the Air Force Academy and West Point, and turned them down to be an engineering student at Purdue. And he just graduated at the end of December and is off to his first engineering job out in Washington State, and just pushing on. He literally came to me at the very end phases of all the military possibilities, and said, "Dad, I just don't think I'm a military person." And I said, "It's a much better conversation to have before you get to basic training, and now someone else is missing out on an opportunity." But all of those kids, I can say, are they've been very strong through the other trials and tribulations and things. And we made a pretty conscious decision, kind of midstream, to go from being in the active Air Force to coming to the Ohio Air National Guard. And that for us was the decision point of, because my next assignment would have been overseas to Korea for at least a year. There was a possibility of taking your family with you to go to Korea for 2 years, and my wife said, "Yeah, I have no desire to go to Korea." And we both were like, "Yeah, that's not going to work in our family plan anyway." And luckily, it was pre 9/11, and the Air Force was losing people a lot to the airlines, which I never wanted to do. And so when we called the Air National Guard, they said, we need pilots really, really badly, and it was just a perfect setup. The other funny part of that was Ohio. We had been stationed once before when I was a lieutenant here, and when we left, we said we'd probably never come back to Ohio. There was no, we couldn't think of any reason why we would come back. And of course, Ohio is where we've been for the majority of our not only marriage, but raising our kids and everything else. And we always say, never tell God what your plans are because you can't.
Exactly. Exactly. How did you meet your wife?
We actually met when I was in pilot training, which most people said was the worst thing that could possibly happen. I had gone back home for Thanksgiving. We had started training, and then Thanksgiving hit, so we had a long weekend. Went back home, and I was leaving that Sunday to go back to Mississippi to training. We're both from Louisville, Kentucky, so it was not a too long of a drive. And my mother basically told me, "No, you're going to church before you hit the road." Said, "Okay, yes, ma'am." I get in the car, and the story on the way to the church that day was my conversation with her telling her that I was not getting married until I was 30 years old. I go back to my previous statement, never tell God what you're doing, right? Because about 15 minutes later, my wife walked through the front door of the church, and we literally eloped 7 months later in the middle of pilot training, which everybody said was a really bad idea. Been best 32 coming on 33 years of my life. So we all always tell people never make statements about what you're going to do, because she was literally in the same spot, didn't want to meet me, I didn't want to meet her, and the next thing you know, we're 7 months later we're married.
Wow, that's quite the story. So she was in pilot training as you were.
She was at home in Louisville area still, so she had gone to University of Louisville. She was a paralegal with an attorney in town there, and running a docket for several large real estate firms there, and just had her own life running. And she was in the same spot I was. She was like, "Yeah, I'm not getting married." And we both again just always look back and go, we were literally saying that the things that we weren't going to do and not listening to what God was saying. But He threw us together, and here we are.
That's amazing. Well, thank God he did a good thing, not paying attention to what you wanted to do.
Exactly. Exactly.
I want to dig a little deeper in what it's like being a military parent. We're
Hmm.
going to take a short time out, very brief, and then we'll come back and delve into that if you don't mind. My guest today is Bernie Willis. This is the Fathering Strong podcast. I'm Eli Williams. Thanks for being with us. We'll be back after this short message.
We dads and father figures need each other. We need a safe, non-judgmental place to share our stories, challenges, heartaches, and joys. Fathering Strong is just such a place. A new online community of connected, engaged, and empowered fathers. Learn more at www.fatheringstrong.com.
My guest today is Bernie Willis. Bernie is a career military man, a pilot. He earned the rank of colonel as a multi-tour commander who flew F-16s and the unmanned MQ-1 Predator drones. Very interesting. Bernie, what were the challenges of having a young family, young children, a young wife, and being in the military?
Mm. So everyone has a different experience with that, but I think if I went back and kind of couched all of my military experience on what I knew, again from what I watched with my parents and how I didn't want things to happen because they typically kind of ran from each other whenever things got bad, and so um, the stress of military life is real, and it's also not helped by some of the culture around it. And so, starting my career and going in there as a relatively young guy in fighter pilot culture, which is very wild sometimes. And I've told people before, it's like watching grown men act like sometimes that they're still in college, and in a fraternity, definitely very fraternal kind of organization in different ways. But the one of the things I would say is probably the easiest to realize is that some of that military culture, especially in the years when I entered that, was still very alcohol driven, and when is the next party, when are the things, get-togethers, and some of those were really great in the units that we
So,
had.
so let me ask you.
Yeah,
Stop you here and ask you.
yeah,
So, how close is the Top Gun movie to real life?
it's pretty close. I would say
That
that
helps.
some of that is real, um, from a cultural perspective,
Hmm.
and it's not as it always depends on the unit that you were in. And one of the things I always tell people, I mean, God had his hand on us because he put us in units most of the time that were very family oriented. Um, and it's one of the reasons why I didn't worry as much about deploying and having to leave my family, because they were such a tight family unit. And I also realized that there were a lot of units that weren't aligned that way, that were very much more mission minded, and the families were secondary. And so you could see the difference between that. And I always tell people, I know we were blessed with the right leaders that had the right cultural ideas, and it made it a little bit easier for us to be a family inside the military because of that. But it did not take away just what I would call just the normal cultural things that are always there. Like most fighter units would have a bar in them. And then, I always say, 20 years later, I look back when I'm, now I'm, after getting into leadership and command positions, and I'm looking back, I'm like, well, how did we not expect that we were going to be growing up a bunch of alcoholics because we had a bar in our units every day, and there were people that you would just kind of watch or would just hang out there when they weren't doing something else. And early on, I can remember somebody kind of asking me, like, yeah, we never see you here on Fridays in the bar. And I was like, well, yeah, because my kids are home from school.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it didn't register to me to just spend every Friday afternoon in their, space. Now, since then, culture has changed a bit, especially in the military and different areas. It's kind of ebbed and flowed in things. And, some of those places still have a place kind of like that, but they'll call that like a heritage center or something. And, they'll still have up all of the historical memorabilia and kind of all those things, and still have gatherings and, things, but the culture has changed a little bit. And I think that's for the good in some ways. And there's been a definite difference in the way that those cultures are handled. Some for the good, some for the bad. But for me, it was an easy decision whenever everybody was like, "Hey, we're all doing this," and I was like, "All right, well, I'm going to do that." And my encouragement to people has been in some of the situations that I felt like just completely got out of control. Um, I would have people come to me and go, why are you not the same, or why are you not being a part of this? And it was very easy for me to look at them and say, as a Christian man, I don't feel like that's something I should be participating in, and so I'm going to go do something else. And it was pretty easy understanding, and that also led to people kind of coming to me when they had other issues that they wanted to discuss. So it's, to me, I think that's God was kind of making it a ministry for me to be able to encourage others, to mentor them in some way, and just show them there was a different way. You didn't have to be like everybody else.
That's so good.
Yeah.
So good. So you were a light in those dark places.
I
Yeah.
absolutely hope so.
Yeah. You retired
Yes,
from the
sir.
military. You've been doing some teaching.
I did.
How did you become a politician? Tell me about that.
Oh boy. So I thought I was ending my military career like three times. And one of when we stopped flying F-16s, our mission changed. Our F-16s went away out at the Springfield Air National Guard base, and we knew that the unmanned mission was coming. I wasn't retirable yet, but I was, getting very close. And the unit commanders said, "Hey, we really need some of the folks who have higher experience, to go to training, get our unit going." And there were a few things they wanted to make sure that we made it with the current rank that we were holding. Some of us had been promoted relatively late because of a lot of the older guys had hung around for a while, so I said, we're going to make sure that you get your time in grade for your retirement. And that, just means that we need for you to help us with this mission. So I did it. I went to Predator School, learned to do the remote mission, found out that I really loved that the system really connected with me. Some it didn't, right? It was a very different mission, but it was real for me because I still had a lot of friends in, Army, Marine Corps kind of lanes, people that were deployed all the time. And I knew early on in that mission that I was going to have direct contact with them because, I mean, live via satellite, you could be talking to young Marines and Army soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan or Iraq and provide them with life saving things at the time that were unmatched by anything else. I mean, it was just a capability that really was enlightening to me, made me feel like, as a person who could retire, what didn't make sense. It made more sense to keep that experience in the new platform to help them get it going, and it turned out to be the most one of the most fulfilling missions while not actually flying aircraft. It's the funniest thing because now you're remote actually flying an aircraft, but that aircraft's on the other side of the earth and you miss all of the rush of adrenaline and the G forces and all the things that are the amazing parts of flying fighter aircraft, but you're actually more combat effective in a theater 8,000 miles away, halfway around the world, live via satellite. To me, it was like the magic of technology providing great things. So wanted to stay around for that for a while.
Sure. Yeah. So, how did you make the transition from that to running for elective
Oh yeah, yeah,
office?
yeah. So there's two connections to that. So as I got into the unmanned mission again, we got it going. Thought I would retire, so I started teaching down at Sinclair at the unmanned certification training center down there, and that's it's a national level asset down there. So I felt like I really wanted to get into the part of that was connecting people in college and some from high school into what all the new technology was, get them going because we knew that was going to be blowing up. That turned into a question from folks up at Emmanuel Christian Academy about how we would get a STEM curriculum into there. And I called a buddy in Florida who Florida had already covered their entire state for high schoolers, teaching them unmanned technology for college credit and getting them industry credentials and their commercial pilot certificates. And we were able to import that program at Emmanuel Christian Academy as a pilot project for the state. And in the conversations with our state senator, Bob Hackett, with our, at the time, state representative, Kyle Kaler, they helped us get money in the state budget to get that going, to show how it could be done. And at the end of 4 years, I had just graduated our first seniors that had gone all the way from freshmen through seniors, had gotten all kinds of college credit, gotten their industry credentials and commercial pilot certificates, had started their own businesses, had gone out and worked in commercial industry, doing these things. And I told them, I said, I'm retiring from the military soon, so I'll have more time to work on this. We should be able to get some more things done. I would like to see expansion happen. COVID happened in the middle of that, so we weren't able to export it to other schools because no one was ready to pick up a new program. They were just trying to survive. And Kyle Cather looks across the table and says, I'm terming out in the House soon. And I just looked at him and I said, I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, I didn't understand that there were term limits, right? That's how smart I was about the process. And they both kind of looked at each other and said, "Would you would you consider running for elected office?" And I said, "No, absolutely not." They said, "Well, why not?" And I said, "Well, one, I'd have to have a long conversation with Miss Lynn because I'm pretty sure this is kind of an important one. We probably need to be together on this. And secondly, I'm not a politician." And they both kind of looked at each other and chuckled and said, "Well, that's what we're looking for, is a not politician." And so I jokingly now say that it's their fault that I'm the non-politician in the mix who, doesn't understand the ways of the political process and how those
Yeah.
things work. And I
What
hope that's
everybody's hungry for.
I hope that's a strength. And
Yeah, it is.
I always now tell people it's very humbling to have 30 plus thousand people in your county and city all put their trust in you and vote for you to put you in that position for 2 years. And we just got sworn in yesterday for a second term, so very excited. We're going to get some great things done for Springfield and Clark County.
Well, I said thank you for your service in the military. Thank you for your political service as well.
I
We
appreciate it.
desperately need good people in office who will help steer our community and our state and our national government in the right direction,
I appreciate
especially
it.
godly people who know the Lord and who try to live their lives in a way that's pleasing to Him.
Yes,
We're
sir.
hungry for that in this country, and so you provide us with some hope.
I
Appreciate that.
appreciate that. Like I
Yeah,
always
and
tell
your
people,
family.
it's worth it. All the service is worth it. I tell young kids all the time, I've never met anyone who has regretted giving themselves over to the service of other people because there's just so much joy in that. I mean, you look back and you find all of the gain that comes out of just serving other people. I know you understand that, Eli.
I do understand it. Yes, yes. That's I feel the same way about that, and especially when you're doing it for the glory of God,
Yes, sir.
and you don't have to be in ministry to do that.
Absolutely. You're right.
You do that as a military man. You do
God
that.
gives you your ministry wherever you are.
That's exactly right. Yep. We're going to take another time out, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you some final questions, which really will lead us to concluding this, so that you can get back to your other business. We're on the Fathering Strong podcast, and my guest is Bernie Willis. We'll return after this brief timeout.
Do you know a new father who could benefit from a basic introduction to healthy fathering principles? POPS 101, a free online course consisting of 4 one-hour sessions in English or Spanish, could be perfect for him. POPS 101 lays out practical steps toward becoming the protector, order keeper, provider, and stabilizer his child needs. Learn more at urbanlight.org.
Welcome back. Eli Williams here. Bernie Willis is my guest today on the Fathering Strong podcast. And we have been enlightened as to his life as a dad, as a military father and husband, and now as an elected official. And we get a sense of where your passion comes from, Bernie. We appreciate you investing this time
Yes,
on the
sir.
podcast as my guest. I want to ask you, in preparing to close this session, what advice would you give a young father who is in the military or not, a very, very busy husband and father with growing children, needing to find balance in his life, balancing career and family and building relationships with small children? What would you recommend?
Well, fatherhood is a leadership position. I think everybody would agree that being the head of a household has responsibilities that sometimes they're beyond what we can measure. And when there are children involved, that position becomes so much more important. And the part that's the hardest about leadership, I remember someone telling me this probably, I don't know, 15 years ago, or that as I was kind of delving into my first, what I felt like, like large scale leadership positions, and kind of making sure that I was developing myself for that. And it's one of the things that I tell folks that are going into marriage, fatherhood, all those things, is that it's a leadership position any way you slice it, and you have to be developing yourself in some way. And the best advice that I was given was that leadership is starts with yourself, and that the hardest part of leadership is leading yourself. And so my advice really is to address yourself, which is kind of funny to say, but I don't jokingly tell people that they need to look in the mirror, whether that's you just the real mirror, or whether that's just in your mind, and tell yourself what it is that you want to do and what you want to be in that situation. Because if you never kind of, some people are better at writing it down, some people are better at hearing it, some people are, all those things. I'm a visual learner, right? So I like to write down things, and so I can see them. And there are times when I'm writing to myself. I think whenever someone tells you that you need to sit down and write down what your goals are. What are your short-term goals and your long-term goals? For me, that makes really good sense, because once I see it, I can think about it all the time, but I don't really learn it well until I have written it down. And so for me, I really do believe that looking in the mirror at myself and saying, this is who I want to be, makes good sense. That's the way it processes in my mind. And everybody's different. So I tell people, figure out what it is that you're going to be able to connect with no kidding, with yourself. Again, sounds really funny to say, but once that kind of happens, they'll start to understand that you really can be in a leadership position for yourself also. And that means you need to be taking care of yourself. You need to be educating yourself, reading about what are the ways that these things have been done, that have been proven. It's no joke that you can pick up a book and get, the best parts of somebody's life that they've actually written down and then integrate them into your own. Who wouldn't want to have the best of those things? So it kind of sounds like a self-help story, right, in some ways, but it really has to be. I think we have to address ourselves personally, realizing how important it is that we lead our families well, because our children are going to be watching us all the time, and they're going to be picking up on the things that we say and the things that we do. And more importantly for me, it was always about what does it feel like? What is the culture like around my family? So I think we need to be strong in protecting against bad influences around our families. We need to be very strong in making sure that the good influences flourish around our families, and that we kind of continually evaluate that. Like it never is static, right? It's always, how do we do it better next time? What are the best things that we can be doing right now? And then I think the last part of that is just to make sure to rest, because sometimes just resting with your family is the best thing that you can do. Because I've watched people who seem like they think that the best way they can run their families is to be giving them all the time and be taking them all the time, and just running and gunning and all, just constant. But just realizing that it contributes to a lot of family chaos, I think, in the end, where kids don't understand what the basic stability is of just being in the box together. Now, I've joked about that many, many times, that for me, if it was just myself and Miss Lynn and our 3 kids and we were just living in a cardboard box, I'd be okay.
Yeah.
Because everything else sometimes seems like noise. And we have some of the best times of our lives when it's just us doing not a lot. Maybe sometimes nothing, but other than being in each other's presence. So that's
What role has your faith played in all of that?
a big one, because prior to meeting Miss Lynn and getting married, I mean, my religious life was just kind of an afterthought. It really was not strong. I did not have a strong faith background. My family was kind of the Easter and Christmas attenders. And sometimes it was just sending me, with others, or sending, myself and my brothers with someone else to go to services or things. And so meeting Miss Lynn, who had a really, I think, really good background and solid foundation, right, completely changed me. And by the time we were about to have our first daughter, I think Miss Lynn was about 8 months pregnant, and I ended up getting, I just had a Holy Spirit moment in one of our services with a gentleman who was preaching in our church over at First Baptist in Fairborn, actually. He was a man who I deeply connected with, almost like he was my grandfather. And when he said, if you feel, like the Spirit pushing you, you should come up here right now. And so I did. The next thing we knew, she's 8 months pregnant, and we were both baptized together at that point. She was, getting rebaptized. I'm getting baptized with her. And I, connected so many things to that, and the fact that she was carrying our first child. And so I tell our oldest, our daughter, all the time, I'm like, you're the one that saved me, because there was this, again, this just innate connection to this whole fatherhood experience that made me want to go and find the Father, and the Father got me, and he grabbed a hold of me. And that's been something that I just can't, it's immeasurable at this point. I think in my entire experience from, then now, 33 years later going, wow, here we are.
Well, that's very inspiring, and I hope that someone listening will gain some inspiration from that and know that a relationship with God is central. If you're going to be the best father you can be, you need guidance from the Father, because
Absolutely.
He is ultimately the source of all good fathering. Thank you
Agreed.
so much for joining us today, Bernie. I know that you have to go. We
Yes,
appreciate
sir.
it so much. And to our listeners, our viewers, we just want to remind you that there are lots of good, solid resources for fathers and those who love them at our website, which is fatheringstrong.com, or the main website, which is urbanlight.org. Go to fatheringstrong.com, download the app, and join the Fatherhood community. You can be part of this community of fathers no matter where you are in the world. That's at www.fatheringstrong.com. On the website, you'll also find a wealth of blog posts and podcast episodes. There are articles, there are devotionals. You can purchase my book, and other resources are available as well. That's at fatheringstrong.com. We hope you'll check it out. Thank you for joining us for this edition of the Fathering Strong podcast. Thanks to my guest, Bernie Willis. Thank you to Bruce Stapleton, who is the wizard behind the curtain. We appreciate him so much. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the next edition of the Fathering Strong podcast.
Fathering Strong is powered by Urban Light Ministries, a not-for-profit organization serving the needs of families and children for nearly 30 years. Your support helps us continue turning the hearts of fathers to their children while meeting some of the immediate critical needs of struggling families with small children. Contributions of all sizes are welcomed at www.urbanlight.org.
The Fathering Strong podcast is a production of Bernie Willis Ministries, with technical assistance from the Momentum Group, and Harold Rayford provides the theme music. So thank you for listening.